Hello and welcome, everyone. It is so wonderful to see everyone's smiling faces. And for those watching the recording of this, I am imagining your smiling faces to learn about local action in climate change and cultural heritage. My name is Victoria Herman, and I have the pleasure of being the director of Preserving Legacies, a global initiative partnered with the International Council on Monuments and Sites, the Climate Heritage Network, the National Geographic Society, and many awe-inspiring local organizations and management authorities on every continent that are committed to safeguarding the places we love from climate change impacts. Today, you will hear from some of those climate heritage heroes who are leading their communities to safeguarding cultural heritage, traditions, our connections to landscape, and our connection across generations from past to present to future. All of this work is being connected to preserving legacies, which is a multi-pronged initiative that equips local site custodians with the training for how to understand future climate change impacts, how to bring communities together to map what matters most to them, and to assess the risk of those future climate impacts on community values. Preserving Legacies is working across 10 awe-inspiring communities now, and we are about to expand our family to welcome 10 new communities to join our transformational change of changing the climate change story from losing the things that make us who we are to safeguarding them by working together. I am going to hand over my virtual mic to one of our incredible site custodians based in Bangladesh, Mahfouz, who is going to give us a welcome from Bangladesh, share a little bit about his climate story of Bagarhat, and connect all of us to why we're here, that we care so deeply about rising to the challenge of the climate crisis while centering our culture and our connection to one another, to our past, and to the places that matter most. Over to you, Mahfouz.
Thank you, Victoria. It's really a pleasure to sit all of you. And I'd like to thank Gobeshona and ICCAT for arranging such a great conference to gather us all together. So this is the pressing question: climate change, how it impact to the society, and how it impact to our livelihood and everything. And before that, I would say that this cultural heritage issue is important fact for all of us, because this cultural identity is actually very much crucial for one nation or one person, because if they do not have any cultural identity, it is very much they don't have any real identity. So it's very crucial to preserve this cultural identity and cultural heritage. And we know that Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable country in the world who are actually going to face the uh, vulnerabilities of climate change, like sea level rise, extreme rainfall, or increased temperature. We face a lot of this kind of problem, especially in the coastal belt of the Bangladesh. And my university and I am also residing in the coastal belt of the country. So we are facing the severe vulnerabilities of the climate change. And we got the opportunity to work with the Preserving Legacies, who actually united all these 10 sites. So among these 10 sites, 2 are primary and 8 are observer sites. So we are actually, Bagherhat is one of the UNESCO World Heritage Site, and they selected us as the observer site among these 10 sites. So we are actually observing the uh, strategies and the techniques for the, like the primary site, like Jordan, the Petra, and also the Philippines, the Cordillera uh, rice terraces. So we observe the climate science in those two sites, and we observe the climate story from those people, and we are getting the knowledge how to uh, play or how to react those challenges, and try to incorporate those lesson to our site. And all those site in like observer site, we conducted to focus group discussion, uh, which actually incorporate the heritage professional and also the local community in the area to know what is the opinion of them about climate change issue, and what is their what is their uh, how to uh, act this kind of climate change thing. So we we have several discussion during that FGD and also after the FGD, and we gather some knowledge dissemination, and also uh, we handed over our report to the Preserving Legacies headquarters. And from those FGD discussion, we found a lot of like new insight. Like for our Bagherhat site, we felt that the same kind of climate change issue also exists during the 15th century, where when Khani Jahan established or constructed his sites or his mosque and other 360 like water reservoir and lot of things. So he knew the challenges of this kind of like salinity, water scarcity, and a lot of this kind of things also existed at the time. So they knew those challenges and took several measures that still exist in the local communities, inside the heart of the local communities. Like they believe that Khani Jahan, he was the problem solver, and he is the peacekeeper at that time. And still his lesson also resonated in the heart of the local people, and also maintained the same things. And still uh, they maintain those learning from the Khani Jahan. So the past lesson by the Khani Jahan also had the good opportunity to be the lesson to the current contemporary people. So this is a good approach, and what the traditional knowledge can teach the present people. So this is from my side. Maybe you can heard a lot of new stories from like other side, like other custodians. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahfouz. As Mahfouz was talking, it reminded me of the title for this session, how we start with local action and we build towards this global goal, not just a global goal on adaptation, but a global goal for a beautifully diverse future where our historic sites and our cultures and our heritage are thriving and are at the center of sustainable lifestyles and climate action. And we do that by learning from the past, as Mahfouz said, from bringing community stakeholders and right holders together to listen and learn together, and to connect across borders, across cultures, which is what I hope you'll hear from many of the Preserving Legacies site custodians, that the real power of this initiative is building friendships and learning lessons from other sites. And that learning starts with our amazing education director, Sarah Ferguson, who I am going to hand my virtual mic to. And it is truly Sarah that provides the bedrock of preserving legacies, because so much of how we envision our project is this weaving together of knowledge and this weaving together of a learning journey. And Sarah is our leader in bringing all of us along on that learning journey. So I will hand it over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Victoria. That was a very, very generous introduction to me. So I'm just going to very quickly share my screen. So I hope, fantastic, we should see that now. So I have been asked to come along as Education and Knowledge Director of Preserving Legacies to come and sort of talk to you guys about cultural and climate adaptation. And specifically what I would like to look at today is how climate adaptation is relevant to the heritage sector, and then how heritage sector is in turn begun to center themselves as being integral to wider climate action and importantly climate adaptation, because we'll have a number of fantastic speakers today in the session who will be able to provide examples of locally led adaptation to climate change. So I would like to take the opportunity to frame the wider considerations of the importance of heritage within climate adaptation. And this is a very brief introduction we are going to be whizzing through, but I think it's really important to be able to contextualize the importance of heritage as it applies to climate adaptation and that wider goal of global goal on adaptation, which Andrew will be introducing much better than I ever could. So just to give a brief sort of overview, we are in the heritage sector very much aware of the impact of climate change on heritage. We have a lot of targeted and very measured understanding of this, of climate change hazards and drivers, whether that's on intangible and tangible heritage at sort of a fixed site or landscape level. So all the different modalities and forms that we may identify or recognize as our own individual or collective heritage, we understand how that is going to be impacted. And so on the screen, you see a couple of tangible physical impacts, and Mahfouz has already begun to talk about some of his own experiences in Bangladesh. And this is something that we have a lot of knowledge of already in terms of recording these sort of things as well. But we also recognize that it is very complicated with a number of very interweaving impacts, both directly and indirectly affecting numerous systems and elements both within communities and associated heritage, again, both intangible and tangible heritage from the site all the way out to large landscapes as well. So just to illustrate some of that, we have sort of coastal erosion, a very common one that manifests across a range of sites, particularly coastal sites, but also riverine sites face some level of erosion as well. We also have flooding, the picture from Venice, damaging historic buildings, eroding cities' infrastructure, threatening livelihoods, all those sort of things as well. And then we've got extreme weather events, which is something that is very devastating to heritage, but is also the wider human systems, and as we're increasingly witnessing across the world, profound impact on human lives and our basic quality of life as well. And so this is just a really quick overview of some of the impacts of some of the drivers that we are witnessing across the world. So I'm just going to turn to what does adaptation look like? And so we are an adaptation conference. So I'm sure most of us here today can understand through its very basic essence that adaptation in human systems really aims to minimize the adverse consequences of actual or expected climate change and sort of maximize opportunities it may also present. So it goes through this cycle. So something which is not an end goal, but a continual process or reassessment, reevaluation, a real learning, collaborative process as our climate realities and experiences change and shift. So whether that be due to changing exposures to hazards, increasing or decreasing vulnerabilities, etc., we all know it is something which is a continual process and something which needs to be in collaboration and in discussion with all the numerous people sort of involved on the ground. And critically, the heritage sector has been mobilizing awareness and examples of how heritage, both tangible and intangible, is critical for adaptation actions. And the particular worth of cultural heritage has actually been indicated within the Paris Agreement, which states that adaptation action should be based on and guided by science, but also traditional knowledge, Indigenous people, and local knowledge systems as well. So why is heritage or culture important for climate adaptation? And I'm going to spend the next sort of 5 minutes in my allocated spot to kind of go over a few key considerations which we will aim to build off throughout the rest of the session, and why we're mobilizing this Heritage for Climate Adaptation Alliance in response to the global goal on adaptation. So why is heritage important for climate adaptation? There's many reasons. Let me just try and summarize a few. But climate change science often overlooks the human experience and the cultural lens in analyzing the causes, impacts, and responses to climate change. So increasingly we're seeing across the science sector, but also as heritage begins to have more conversations with organizations such as IPCC, that science-based solutions will need to be socially, economically, politically, and culturally interwoven. And as such, and this is a quote from one of the white papers, which Hannah Morale and Sama will be talking about a little bit later, but mobilizing the effective power of heritage becomes a powerful tool in organizing for climate action. Although this involves emphasizing a different version of heritage, less concerned with national pasts and more concerned with collective human endeavor. And that's where that really important locally led adaptation comes into the foreplay, because oftentimes we tend to prioritize quite monumental national level sort of heritage, but we're really focused on that local led, you know, the communities telling us what is important, what is their heritage that actually needs to be protected. And so something to also consider is that critically clear similarities between climate adaptation or synergies between climate adaptation and heritage is the idea of, rather than limiting or leveraging the effects of climate change to protect existing systems and structure, the purpose of climate adaptation, like heritage stewardship, is to choose which elements are maintained, which are allowed to change, and which are purposely altered. So the heritage field is one that really recognizes that not everything can be or will be preserved. We are in a field which recognizes that things will change across time. And really the purpose of heritage management is to not lock landscapes, practices, or buildings in a stasis, but to steward the rate of change and the type of change that is being experienced very much through that local perspective and being locally led. So heritage is something which can really help us prioritize change as requiring an understanding of how we value things and how values change as well. So values shape adaptation preferences and culture shapes values. And that's a really important thing, which I think heritage can feed into the sort of adaptation conversation, including a sense of what is just and fair, who is responsible, how much change is beneficial. So, for example, when we're thinking about managed retreat, flipping the question as to why move to why stay, which allows us to focus attention on why it's important for people to stay in a particular place. And so when reasons are explicit for allowing change and embracing change to happen as expressed through values, then I think adaptation efforts can be more appropriately targeted, and also there's more buy-in by communities as they feel more represented and their values feel more represented as well. And even when it's not possible to preserve things or people or places or values, identifying those values also signals a need to recognize loss and to be able to go through processes of change and grief, which I think is going to be really important going forward, increasingly as we're seeing a lot more communities facing loss and damage already occurring. Oh, sorry. So the challenge, and this is to tie back to that sort of climate justice, is one that's actually common not just to heritage, but also to adaptation, is when we make decisions about what is to be preserved, what is allowed to change, what is altered, that we do so in a way that does not privilege groups or perpetuate inequities or inequalities. And heritage does have experience, our field does have experience in grappling with these concerns. So not to just preserve heritage of colonial powers or have a divide between nature and cultural heritage, as to not undervalue Indigenous perspectives and histories. And so climate adaptation scholarship has acknowledged that adaptation actions can privilege the wealthy or the powerful, and it has begun to confront these sort of challenges. And so there's a real benefit in allowing climate adaptation scholarship to kind of leverage the lessons learned in heritage studies, while heritage studies in turn could learn and benefit from the broad stakeholders and perspectives of adaptation studies as well. And so, because again, decisions about what to change, what to preserve are not scientific ones. They're decisions informed by science, but they're ultimately social, ethical, value-based decisions about who individuals, peoples, decision makers, and societies want to be in the present, but also what they want to preserve in the future, that sort of intergenerational equity and transmission as well. And this in turn is shaped by power dynamics, history, and heritage as well. And so I'm just going to finish by giving two examples of how heritage has informed, adaptation is informed through heritage. And one of them is through including our understandings from the past. So from past knowledge, which are able to share information and expertise about past dependencies, and also responses that can have millennia of information or even just short-term sort of knowledge from the past as well. And then also diverse knowledge systems. So the multiplicity of different communities, social networks, and social inclusion can play a key role in adaptation and resilience. So just to cover those very quickly, the role of past knowledge, you know, a lot can be learnt from the past, so archaeological methods combined with natural science, based methods, complex statistical modelling, all these sort of things alongside local and Indigenous knowledge allows for increasingly multi and transdisciplinary approaches and understandings of adaptation. So exploring the past and sort of how past stresses and sort of climate the past to help inform mitigation adaptation pathways in the future. And then just to finish, because we have a lot of representation of local communities, which is a core goal of preserving legacies, is the validation of Indigenous and local knowledge, because these systems offer many examples of skills, technologies, land management practices, and the like, which are of real utility and importance when we try to think about climate action and representative and equitable climate action as well, particularly in the adaptation space. So using historical and contemporary, because we have to recognize that Indigenous and local communities have gone through change, through past processes, whether it's colonialism or many other things. So our past knowledge foundations have been impacted by colonization and other things. So we need to recognize that. And then also the value of Indigenous and local knowledge, because it's place-based, it's local, it's based on observations, it's accumulated over generations. So opening up this neglected and undervalued archive is really essential to ensure effective representative solutions in the adaptation space as well. So that's just to say it's holistic, place-based, cyclical, learn from observations, all these kind of things as well. And that's really something which I think will probably be spoken of a little bit more when we talk about the ICSM-CHC, but a main finding of that is the importance of harnessing those plural knowledge systems as well. So scientific, local and Indigenous knowledge being used together to really have a representative and complex and complete look at trying to address climate challenges as well. The caveat for that is make sure that it's not done in a way which is co-optive or extractive, but actually represents each knowledge system in its sort of complex cosmovision, so it's complete fullness as well. So I'm very much race through this. There's a lot to cover when it comes to heritage's sort of contribution to adaptation, but I just hope this gives an overarching framework where we begin to have a lot of really fruitful discussions going forward, and hopefully it sets a great stage for Andrew to now to come in and to talk about the importance of having this Heritage Climate Adaptation Alliance and allowing heritage and the importance of heritage to contribute to the global goal on adaptation. So I'll just stop sharing my screen and I'll pass it on to you, Andrew.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks very much. Hello, all. My name is Andrew Potts, and I'm speaking to you from the Climate Heritage Network, which is a partner in the Preserving Legacies project, which is the sponsor of this session. So Sarah has done really an amazing job of surveying the multiplicity of ways that culture and heritage intersect with climate adaptation, giving you a taste of those dimensions. And then we opened this session with a story from a particular local community, the community of Bagharat in Bangladesh, where Mahfouz showed how heritage is at the center of that community's efforts to adapt to climate change. And so from Mahfouz's and Sarah's presentations, we begin to have a better understanding of the importance of culture and heritage to climate adaptation. But notwithstanding that, and notwithstanding the fact that there are many, many, many other examples of this drawn from around the world, even so, often climate adaptation policy overlooks cultural heritage. Often climate adaptation finance overlooks cultural heritage. And that's a problem, not only because it undermines the effectiveness of those policies, but also when cultural heritage is missing from adaptation policy, then it disadvantages local communities, locally led adaptation efforts that are trying to use cultural strategies, because there aren't entry points for them in climate finance, there aren't entry points for them in climate planning. The good news is that that is starting to change. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes, the new UN Global Goal on Adaptation and how it actually does put cultural heritage at the center. And so I'm going to share my screen now. There we go. You guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So COP28, the UN climate conference that concluded just a few months ago in Dubai, it was a mixed bag. Some things to like, some things not to like. But one of the decisions that was taken at COP28, which is presented as one of the main accomplishments of the conference, was the adoption of the new global goal on adaptation. So the idea of having a global goal on adaptation is not new. It's actually included in the Paris Agreement, on climate change. It's section 7.1 of the Paris Agreement. Now, of course, the Paris Agreement was adopted almost 10 years ago. Why are we just hearing about the global goal on adaptation now? It's because, to be honest, the governments of the world never got around, never chose to tackle this assignment from the Paris Agreement to create this global goal on adaptation. I think we all know about the global goal on mitigation that's set out in the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement has been read as saying that we want to try to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels. That's the global goal on mitigation. There was always meant to be a global goal on adaptation, but until now it didn't exist. But that changed at COP28 when the Conference of Parties adopted this new global goal on adaptation. The idea of the GGA is to try to bring parity to efforts at adaptation, parity with efforts at climate mitigation. It's to create a unifying framework that will allow benchmarking and measurement of adaptation efforts around the world, and a framework that can encourage and guide climate finance and climate technical assistance. And so, while the delays in creating the global goal on adaptation and the content of the global goal on adaptation have been controversial, and some people are happy with it and some people are not, it is, at the least we can say, a step forward in efforts to put a focus on climate adaptation around the globe. The reason why we're talking about the global goal on adaptation is because of its focus on culture and heritage. So at the core of the global goal of adaptation is a series of thematic targets. So the GGA picked 7 thematic fields, and it establishes global goals for adapting those areas by 2030. And the 7 are water systems, food and agriculture systems, health, nature and biodiversity, infrastructure and human settlements, poverty eradication efforts and livelihoods, and then 7th is cultural heritage. And so this is quite a remarkable development. I mentioned at the outset that culture and heritage are often missing from climate policy, even climate adaptation policy, but that is most certainly not the case in the new global goal on adaptation, which has elevated culture and heritage to this status of being one of only 7 topics, 7 themes that are a focus. And so this is quite remarkable. I think you could argue that the global goal on adaptation is the single most important culture and climate change policy that we have. And that's why it's a focus of this session, and that's why it's a focus of the new Heritage Adapts to Climate Alliance that we'll be talking about in a moment. It's so important, this new global goal on adaptation culture heritage thematic target, that I'm taking the time to present the text of that target to you in full. The new global goal on adaptation says that by 2030, national governments and stakeholders at all levels should protect cultural heritage from the impacts of climate-related risks by developing adaptive strategies for preserving cultural practices and heritage sites, and by designing climate-resilient infrastructure guided by traditional knowledge, indigenous peoples' knowledge, and local knowledge systems. And so what the GGA asks is that every country on the world enhance its attention to safeguarding cultural heritage by developing adaptive strategies for preserving that heritage in the face of climate impacts. And 2 things further to note about this text. Notice that it talks about protecting cultural heritage, both sites and practices. So for heritage professionals, that wording might seem a little imprecise, but I think in the end, it's useful language because it focuses both on tangible heritage, buildings, sites, monuments, but also intangible heritage like cultural practices. It's also noteworthy the way the protection of cultural heritage has been linked to climate resilient infrastructure. So This is Global Goal on Adaptation, paragraph 9G. Most of us aren't lawyers, and so we don't memorize the citations of policy documents, but it's so extraordinary to have a high-level international climate policy focused on cultural heritage that I do think it's worth all of us knowing that Global Goal on Adaptation, paragraph 9G exists. What's more, 9G is not the only place that cultural heritage makes an appearance in the new Global Goal on Adaptation. I also want to draw your attention to paragraph 22 of the new Global Goal on Adaptation, which adds a transversal focus on traditional knowledge. But what do I mean when I say transversal? Well, I said before there were 7 thematic targets: food systems, water, health. Another one of them is cultural heritage. That can be distinguished from this paragraph, which actually talks about the relevance of a form of cultural heritage, that is traditional knowledge, to all the thematic targets. So here we're not talking about safeguarding cultural heritage from climate impacts. We're talking about the importance of traditional knowledge to adaptation of all dimensions of society. And so I think that's particularly noteworthy, that we have in one part of the GGA a recognition of the need to adapt cultural heritage itself to climate impacts. But here in paragraph 22, we have a recognition of the importance of traditional knowledge, local knowledge systems, the values and wisdom of Indigenous people to all forms of adaptation and adaptation across all the dimensions of society. And there's one last provision of the Global Goal on Adaptation that I want to mention. In addition to the 7 thematic targets that the GGA creates, the GGA also introduces another concept known as the iterative adaptation cycle. And that's basically the cycle of planning and executing adaptation. It has 4 dimensions: planning, impact assessment, planning, implementation, and monitoring. It describes the process of adaptation. And the GGA also says that the design of those elements of the cycle, the process of adaptation, should as well be guided by traditional knowledge. So how do you monitor the success of adaptation? How do you design the implementation of adaptation measures in any dimension of society? Those 2, it says, should be guided by traditional knowledge, Indigenous peoples' knowledge, local knowledge systems. It also specifically talks about the importance of locally led and community-based adaptation in the GGA. So as we'll talk about a little bit more at the end of this session, the embedding of culture and heritage in the new Global Goal on Adaptation is really a milestone in the recognition of the cultural dimensions of climate action, and an incredible opportunity to bolster and strengthen local culture-based climate action, and something really worthy of the attention of everyone in this call. So I'm going to stop there in presenting the new Global Goal on Adaptation. In a few minutes, we're going to come back to it because we're going to talk about the new Heritage Adapts to Climate Alliance, which is a new platform to help you engage with the elaboration of the Global Goal on Adaptation. But before we get to that, we want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the emerging research that is available on the cultural dimensions of adaptation. So how will we elaborate the cultural heritage provisions of the Global Goal on Adaptation? Well, the good news is there's a lot of research, but also some gaps to help us do that. The Gobeshona conference has a focus on research, and so that's why we wanted to highlight some of this. And in particular, we want to highlight developments from the recently completed IPCC International Co-Sponsored Meeting on Culture, Heritage, and Climate Change, since that really focused on these questions. And to take us more deeply into that IPCC co-sponsored meeting and its outcomes and how that illuminates the way forward in terms of understanding the cultural dimensions of adaptation and elaborating the cultural heritage provisions of the new global goal on adaptation. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Salma Sabor and Dr. Hannah Morell. Salma is the science director for the Preserving Legacies project, and Hannah is the science director for the IPCC co-sponsored meeting. And so, Salma, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I'll give the floor to Hannah first, and then I'll follow up after her.
Thanks, Selma. Okay, I'm just gonna share my slides. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone, and thanks for having me here today. Very briefly, I'm going to talk about the work of the International Co-Sponsored Meeting on Culture, Heritage, and Climate Change, or ICSM-CHC, in my capacity as its scientific coordinator, as Andrew pointed out, and regarding the ways that in which it aligns with the messaging and priority of the GGA and how to take work across the sector to the next stage. So the project worked across its co-sponsors, UNESCO, the IPCC, and ICMOS, with the IUCN and ICLEI as its partners. Not only did it aim to strengthen relations between organizations working on heritage and climate change, as recommended at the 2016 UNESCO World Heritage Convention, but it also aimed to take stock of the state of knowledge and identify gaps in 3 themes. So one, the systemic connections of culture, heritage, and climate change, labeled as the knowledge systems theme. Second, loss, damage, and adaptation for culture and heritage, labeled as the impacts theme. And third, roles of culture and heritage in transformative change and alternative sustainable futures, labeled as the solutions theme. And cutting across those themes is the capacity to learn from the past and cultural governance. So I'm going to whiz through and move straight to some of our outputs, all of which are available online and are fantastic resources. And they include 3 white papers and a global research and action agenda on culture, heritage, and climate change. And to flag some of the key takeaways from only 2 of those 3 white papers, as Salma will be doing the 3rd. I start with the knowledge systems one. The authors define knowledge systems as sets of interacting agents, practices, and institutions that organize the production, transfer, and use of knowledge, and as complex ensembles of connected values, practices, institutions, as well as beliefs, worldviews, emotions, and senses. Key findings from their paper include the importance of drawing on different ways of knowing to address complex global problems, that ways of knowing are also ways of being, ways of doing and making, and ways of relating and caring. That recognition of and respect for all knowledge systems, so indigenous knowledge, local knowledge, and scientific knowledge, are fundamental preconditions to advance climate responses. And with that in mind, that deep historical structures of colonialism and ongoing inequalities can block efforts to draw on plural knowledge systems to understand and address climate change from different perspectives. And to briefly summarize some of the key themes from the solutions white paper, they highlight that science-based solutions are entangled and that we as heritage practitioners can help understand those entanglements. And also they provide examples that explore the power of heritage in mobilization, the creative arts role in imagining viable futures, the need for cooperation and collaboration, and the recognition of both external and internal power dynamics across all parts of life, whether in communities, local, regional, national, or international contexts. And after reviewing the white papers, I took away talking points from each to explore more widely in intensive discussion groups, which was held over the international meeting, 5-day meeting. And these discussions
are what emerged as the Global and Research Action Agenda. And this extensive research and work and our findings and recommendations align with the common messaging of the Global Adaptation Network about, for example, inclusivity and participation, or informed metrics, regional cooperation and coordination, adaptation finance, and country-driven and locally led adaptation. But what is of relevance here is how culture and heritage can embrace innovation and empower communities, how it can build institutional, technical, and societal capabilities, how it can engage groups, and how it must be better understood to formulate effective adaptation strategies, including inclusive ways of monitoring and evaluation systems to assess existing practices. We have 13 case studies from across the world that explore these concepts through their address of areas such as management systems, water heritage, built environments, cities, agriculture and food security, and so forth. So many of the themes that are in the GGA that Andrew highlighted. And just to show how this research can feed into practice, I've used these findings and directly applied them to a community-led project here in England called Coasts in Mind. So just to give a taste of it, it brings together intangible, tangible, and natural heritage to provide a people's record of change and triangulates that record with other science-based data sets. As a people-powered community engagement project, it works with coastal communities to compile community heritage through local experiences, images, documents, and accounts of cultural and natural heritage to then co-create an open access and spatially mapped community archive of local heritage. And this community archive and community activities not only encourage community connectedness, but it upskills and trains communities through flexible learning and invests in locally left behind communities to build resilience. And on top of that, it also is about enabling local people to have the capacity to inform local decisions and policies and add to existing coastal records such as environmental data sets and archive connections. We focus on elder people, young people, and structurally disadvantaged people, and have brought in over 30 partners from across sectors and localities to deliver and match fund the project. Through people being the eyes and ears of their environments, we've co-developed a set of local indicators that can help map change, and already compiled an archive of local knowledge through people and their oral histories and personal memorabilia, which provide that community voice of what is changing in their lives and livelihoods through their lived experiences, memories, personal belongings, and stories, and that understanding of risk and uncertainty within lifetimes. Meanwhile, they have opportunities to contribute and co-develop research and address change in their communities. So that's a very quick example of how a high-level takeaways such as ICSM, how we've identified key windows of opportunities and how those windows of opportunities could be identified to directly feed into practice via research or community projects and so forth. But also the ICSM team have shared and presented a range of reports and have seen some wins at COP27 with the inclusion of cultural heritage in the cover decision for the first time. For COP28's Emirates Declaration on Culture-Based Climate Action, which gave a nod to the ICSM in its text. And at the IPCC's 60th session, which noted the work topics as very close to a lot of delegates' hearts. So that's an extremely quick run through of the power of research and how it can feed into local thinking. Thank you. And now I pass on to Salma to do the impacts paper.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen. Hi, everyone, can you see the screen?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. So welcome everyone to this session. I'm really happy to be here with you. I'll be presenting quickly what we've been working on a couple of years ago with Dr. Nick Simpson, Dr. Scott Allen Orr, and a group of researchers all over the world trying to understand what has been done in the scientific literature and some gray literature around impact, vulnerability, heritage, and climate change. One of the main findings was that climate change is actually already impacting multiple types of heritage places across all regions of the world. That future climate change poses increased risk to heritage globally, including losses and damage to the heritage of current and future generations, and particularly severe impacts on the intangible cultural heritage of indigenous and local communities. And this finding can be directly linked to the second principle of the local led adaptation, which is addressing structural inequalities faced by women, youth, children, people with disabilities, people who are displaced, indigenous people, and marginalized ethnic groups. In fact, there is inequalities in how heritage places are impacted by climate change. And there are factors, either social, economic, and cultural, that change the risk that communities and places are facing due to climate change. And it's important to because they define how risk and impacts are perceived and lived around the world. Another finding is that climate change impacts on heritage are not being studied consistently nor systematically. So a range wide ways of doing research and conducting this research, which is important. Diversity is really important. However, it was really difficult to compare, understand links and challenges as these studies were not connected, and people who were conducting those studies were not connecting. Another finding was that there's a global imbalance in the number of publications assessing the impacts of climate change on heritage between different regions. You can see here for natural heritage, the geographic distribution of a paper, and looking at impacts of climate change on heritage. So you can see that places, for instance, the African continent, where communities, heritage places are at high risk from climate change, are places where there is the least research on climate change impacts on heritage. This is what we find for cultural heritage. So this is specifically the scientific literature and scientific publications. We also find out that disparities in climate heritage publication appear to be determined by research funding, income inequality, colonial legacies, legal system of heritage protection, local versus international interest in heritage, but also the language of publications, because we've explored only English papers and some French and Spanish and Japanese papers. So a lot of what is available in the literature we didn't explore. So this is also something that can affect our findings. But today it is difficult to know if what we know about the impacts of climate change on heritage in the scientific literature is just a reflection of where the science is funded, rather than where or when heritage is being affected by climate change. And this is really an important point, because what we know, it's not the reality, and it's not what's happening in the world, and how communities and heritage managers are dealing with climate change. So this links directly to the third and fourth principle of local-led adaptation in relation to providing patient and predictable funding that can be accessed more easily everywhere, but also investing in local capabilities to leave an institutional legacy and support communities and support heritage professionals in the way they can safeguard their values linked to their heritage places in a sustainable way. The impacts of climate change on the broader economic and social cultural values of heritage are neither investigated nor reviewed globally and rarely explored regionally or locally. So there are no studies today that are actually looking at a wide themes of values and how how climate change is impacting them. Most of the studies are concentrating on attributes, on physical impacts, which are not reflective of what the real impacts climate change have on heritage places. Alignment of climate change risk terms might facilitate collaboration between climate science and heritage research field. And this is something really important. It doesn't mean that one needs to take over what the other is doing, but actually having efforts done in both fields towards something more homogeneous and something that actually allows communication between these two fields. I think this links to the fifth principle of local adaptation and the sixth principle. So building a robust understanding of climate risk and uncertainty for communities, for heritage managers. It is a complex subject, but it is definitely accessible to anyone. Risk is something that we all live with, that we've all assess in a daily basis. So climate risk is a slightly different, but it's something that we are used to and that we can really make our own and feel empowered to talk about it. And flexible programming and learning that's actually allow climate scientists to learn more about the cultural literacy of heritage and communities, mostly indigenous and local indigenous people and local communities, but also in the other way. So having trainings for heritage professionals in relation to how they understand and view risk and climate change risk. The two last findings that we've had were that innovative methods assessing social and cultural vulnerability are needed to integrate the value of intangible cultural heritage with assessments of climate change risks. And this is link also to decolonizing the way we're doing things, and links tightly to devolving decision-making to the lowest appropriate level, the first principle of local-led adaptation, because innovative approaches are co-created with communities, with people who are on the ground. They are not co-created at a high level. Finally, this also creates the opportunity for climate change heritage research to embrace transformational, inter and transdisciplinary and decolonial principles to address a range of research and practices challenges as the field matures. And this links to the collaborative action investments, but also to some of the other principles of local-led adaptation, as we are thinking about another way to do research, another approach to consider research projects and to build research projects. I think doing this report and thinking about it on the light of the different locally led adaptation principles allows to see how assessing impact is really important to build adaptation. We need to understand a little bit more how climate change is impacting communities and especially values. And from understanding that, we can build with the communities, with the heritage professionals, and also bring this knowledge to the rest of the sectors, the best approaches for adaptation to avoid maladaptation. Thank you so much. I'll give the floor back to Andrew or Victoria.
Thank you, Salma. So Salma and Hannah did an amazing job in a short amount of time of giving a flavor of the research that is being done around the world at the intersection of culture and adaptation, but also some of the gaps. And Hannah even went further and talked about how that's being applied in some specific local communities in the UK. Thank you for that, Hannah. Because this is a conference focused on locally led adaptation, we want to keep coming back to those local examples. And that's what we're going to do right now. And this time, though, going to a different part of the world, to Colombia. And it's my pleasure now to give the floor to Carlos del Cairo and Gabriela Carleon. And Carlos and Gabriela, ask you to share some perspectives on these topics from the adaptation work that you're a part of in some coastal neighborhoods of Cartagena des Indies in Colombia. So Carlos and Gabriela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. In fact, here we are trying to work according to the methodology that we're working with the Preserving Legacies project about a site in Cartagena de Indias. And we call the title is Local Solutions for Global Problems. And our idea is to try to show our methodology in order to work with community participation in the management of climate change impacts on the maritime cultural heritage of Cartagena de Indias. Next, please, Gary. In fact, just to tell you, Cartagena de Indias is in the South America, in the north part of South America. And Cartagena, it's known because it's World Heritage Site since 1984 because of its system of fortifications and colonial houses from the 16th century. And from then, of course, Cartagena, it's famous because of this architecture. And since then, we are trying to work in this huge place, because it's not only one place, it's a huge place of the city, of the landscape. Right now, since 2 years ago, since 2000, I think 2018, we are working in a management plan with the Ministry of Culture named Fortified Landscape of Cartagena de Indias, according to try to work in the protection of all these cultural places, historical places, natural places, and of course, everything related with the intangible cultural heritage. But according to this methodology, we are trying to propose that the solutions can be developed and can be found at the interior of the communities. In Colombia and in Cartagena de Indias, there are several communities, descendants from the Africans, Afro-Colombians, and also indigenous people. And of course, that we are going to try to integrate is the participation of all the communities in the formulation of this management plan. And what we can do it, first of the things that we start to develop with the Preserving Legacies project, it was the methodology that we have to understand the perceptions and the meanings of the local communities related with its territory. And that's why the first thing is try to understand, then identify, then measure, and then propose. And that was our first approach with the communities, trying to understand what is the relationship between the human and the territory? What are the human actors and non-human actors that are in a dynamic in the territory, and everything related with what kind of climate impacts are affecting the cultural heritage? Next, please. In this, and then we try to relate it with the principles for the locally led adaptation, the 8 principles. And of course, most of them, we are working on it. The idea is try to understand the structure of knowledge and the structuration of the knowledge of the communities in Tierra Bomba Island. In this Tierra Bomba Island, we have a lot of cultural representations, not only intangible heritage, also tangible heritage related with fortifications, shipwrecks, natural resources like mangroves, and everything is located in one place. So we try, next please, understand and try to make a kind of an ethnographical approach. Siguiente, Gaby. Gaby?
Hear me?
Gaby, next.
Yes, I'm here, but the screen, no? Oh
Well,
my God.
I continue to talk then. It's blocked. But the idea is that we start to identify some local groups in the community. We start to work with children between 9 years old.
Maybe we lost Carlos.
You can hear me, or is my internet? I don't know.
Yes, Gabriela, we can hear you.
We hear you,
And
Gabriel.
Carlos is back.
Good.
Carlos, I can hear you.
Thank you very much. We have some problems with the internet, but I can continue. So the idea is that we were working also with a group of children between 9 years old and 14 years old in order to understand these meanings and these definitions about what is the cultural heritage, how are they important for them, and if they recognize it.
We have problems with internet.
Gabrielle, we hear you. Okay, do you think you could finish out this slide?
Yes, of course. Well, yes, it was an opportunity to share communities, okay, with the children and with adults, but also we work maybe to understand where's the relation with this heritage, and to understand the capacity or maybe of the community to relate it with this heritage. Carlos, you come back. I can.
The idea was, in fact, try to.
I'm so sorry. So maybe I continue with this presentation. Well, these are some pictures about the workshops that we did in the last year, with representing not only the communities. You can also see some representing of government institutions, and it was the first time that we record information and we connect this knowledge, because Colombia have maybe a different point of view, but common to connect with this institution, with the community. It was a great experience for this time. We work with the community, with young people, and it was amazing because we present some tools and some tools that maybe in academic point of view we use all the time. Present and give these tools for the community and present this information, but also the idea it's the community give us some information about how they understand this problematic, this effects for climate change. Okay, Carlos, continue.
Thank you. I try with the phone. So the idea, it was trying to develop some model about that we are calling it the co-research community. The idea is try to make a research approach with the communities, and we consider the people of the community of researchers, community researchers. And the idea is to articulate the knowledge between the scientific approach with the knowledge from the community. And in this way, we found very interesting results in order to understand their territory and their environment. That's why we start, next to Gabriela, we start to identify not only the values, but also the interaction and the meanings about their context. We start to build a kind of glossary about what they understand of their space and what is the relationship with the cultural heritage. Next. And in this case, we start to make some diagrams in order to identify not only the power and the level of influence of the community, but also the level of influence and interest of the institutions, and of course, also of the academy. And we start to work in a kind of synergy, cooperation between local institutions like the National Institute of Cultural Heritage and the Cartagena's Institute of Cultural Heritage, but also with universities in Cartagena and also with the communities. And we start to identify what kind of interest and level of influence they have. We start also to organize some round tables in order to approach these three kinds of knowledge and also propose some strategies to the valorization of the cultural heritage and the idea to develop this community methodology in order to identify the impacts on cultural heritage. It was a very wonderful work because the community also we are trying to transfer all the knowledge from what we know, and of course we are learning what they know. Gabriela, please.
Okay, so in this part, our workshops that we did the last year, but in this case, we propose a methodology to identify the personal experience around or related with the place, with the places or and their feeling. So we give some a question about which place represent a happiness, sadness, or anger, and live in this territory, and they put this information in this circle in the what is they consider it most important and less important, and they put in represent in the center of the circle, and on the othermost part representing the less important. So we present some results about that. For example, in the happiness, most of the places that they share with their parents, their home, also the beach, because most of the part of this interview, they give some information about the beach, because not only because they are a place that they share with their families and friends, also because they represent economical value. Most of the people, they survive with the tourists, so they work in the beach, but also they work in the heritage. And also the other part, for example, the sadness, most of the emotion is represented in at home for their parents, and they give a lot of information about that. But and then for this workshop, we want to introduce how we're the feeling about the heritage places. So for that we classify in the what is important of heritage sites, and where is the feelings of that, where is most important and less important. And we identify, for example, the less important are the heritage that disappear because they don't exist, like a castle of the San Luis, but also they're because their impact for climate change, that, for example, is the Fort of San Jose, that in this is incredible, and maybe in the 10 years, in the next 2 years, maybe this site disappear. So we can reconnect this information with their feelings and how this heritage disappears for a lot of stuff, social probably the climate change. On the other hand, of more importance, they're represented because they have a story when there was children. So this is the relation with these heritage places. And finally, with these graphics, you can see some results about how they feeling about the maybe the relation with the months of the years and what happened in that moment for natural and non-natural phenomena, according to Boca Chica community. So, for example, in January for the flies and February bees, May and April and May it's the months for the witch. And December and November, there's the raining and the breeze. So this relation with these months can brings us some information about how they feeling about the years, but also how changed for maybe 10 years ago. And in the other picture, you can see we work with children. So the activity was to draw some information about their homes. And most of these pictures represent how the houses lost it because the level of sea inside their houses, and there has a lot of problems because of the contamination and the raining. So this information is so important to understand what happened in this moment and how what is the feeling for the children, for the young people, and the adults. And finally, with these some maps, because we want to represent it in maybe in a geographical point of view. So where is the related, what is most important, what is the high or low or medium importance level for the community. Most of them, their relation with the tourists, with the personal lives, because they are community values. But most of them is because they represent the economic values. Yes, that it's not time to survive. And the low places that have the importance level low is there's some places that disappear right now. And we work with this knowledge with the personal legacies and the workshops, and we include some other values that we identify in these workshops. For example, we identify the aesthetic values or community values, ecological values like the mangroves that are so important in this community, but maybe disappear because the community cut the mangroves. And yes, of course, the historical value that represent these places. This is the reality right now. We work the community, and they took the pictures about what happened in some parts of the years. Maybe it's a way to monitoring yes, in a point of view of the community, because they take the pictures and send us of the WhatsApp groups, and we recollect this information in this moment. No, these are some the projects that we work in the last year, and maybe will continue with this year. And you can search in the website about how are the results of some of these results of the projects, Anthropocene, Blue Collaboratory, and of course the Preservable Legacies that we sent this the final deliverables. So thank you so much for hear us.
Yeah, thank you very much for that rich presentation from Cartagena. So we're running a little bit behind schedule, and we want to finish on time. So I think for our remaining 10 minutes or so, why don't we do it this way? Mahfouz, I think we began with you in Bangladesh, and it's fitting that we wrap up in Bangladesh as well. So Mahfouz, maybe, I know you got to share some of your presentation already. If you could maybe just in 5 minutes, give us some additional insights into this locally led cultural heritage-based adaptation work in the Bagharat community in Bangladesh, a little taste of it. And then for our final 5 minutes, Marlon, I'm gonna come to you, and I'm gonna ask you to give us a concluding reflection, Marlon. And the question is this. We see this rich practice around the world, including, Marlon, your own work in Ifugao in the Philippines. We know there's this global goal on adaptation. Preserving legacies wants to connect the two. And so Marlon, I'm going to ask you for a concluding reflection on how best can we facilitate this local action, these local insights being contributed to the elaboration of the new global goal on adaptation. And then we'll say goodbye. So Mahfouz, do you want to make an additional reflection about this work in Bangladesh? But quickly, please.
Mahfouz, you need to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So I already have told that there are 10 sites, and Khalifatabad Mosque City of Bagherhat is one of the observer site, and which is actually constructed at 15th century by Khani Jahan, and his magnificent structure actually is termed as Khani Jahan style. So we conducted 2 focus group discussion, and there are two groups. So one group is consisted by several officials, especially the Department of Archaeology officials and some other heritage enthusiasts, and the second group is actually based on the local communities. So we actually question them the same question. So the question is like, what is the tangible and intangible asset that Bagherhat possesses, and what is the types of like climate change threats for this heritage assets are facing now, and what is the adaptation measures or adaptation option for this kind of heritage site. So from these observation, we sorted their comments, and everyone actually took part in the discussion and agreed that the Khani Jahan actually gave them the spiritual, religious, and humanitarian importance, this structure. And also this structure is very much famous for its different style, what is named as Khani Jahan style. So this structure is not like the Persian or even like the Mughal or anything. It's a local. It's blended with the local climatic and local architectural style. So quite different, like in the same architectural style in the other side or the other part of the world. So they responded that Khani Jahan actually is a problem solver, and his lessons actually reflected still now. And in Bagherhat, there is no like political riots or anything, because Khani Jahan actually taught the local people about the thing of unity. So this is the most important lesson they learned from the Khani Jahan. And still now there are a lot of like events like Khanjanali Fair. It is like a more than 100 years old festival that is still is happening now. And I already told that there are crocodiles in large water bodies in the Khani Jahan ponds, which is more than like 200 years or more than that. So they are maintaining these rituals and here in the tomb of Khani Jahan. And the climate change threat is actually, there are a lot of like marshland and which is being used for shrimp cultivation. But the thing is that they understood the problem and they changed their like shrimp cultivation to like paddy or any other agri-based cultural things. And They identified that the most problem is dampness because it's a lot of rain during the monsoon period, and obviously the temperature is going to rise during the summer period. So lay frozen, that means soil deposits on the surface of the wall, and there are a lot of vegetation. These are the climate change problem. And the locally led adaptation, before going to tell the locally led adaptation technique, I am going to tell about the technique that adopted by Khani Jahan at that period, that means at 15th century. So he actually knew the climate of this region, and though he came from Turkey, so he introduced the stone column. This stone column actually is not the common building material in this part, because stone is not found in Bangladesh or like surrounding area. So he brought this stone from like a distant away, and he raised the plinth so that flood water cannot enter into the mosque, and also he create some arrangement to quick disposal of the rainwater. So these are the like very crucial decision that he took to protect the structure from like climate related issues. And obviously he is very much careful about the salinity problem, so he took a very different kind of clay material to burn the clay brick, and also the different kind of snail to prepare the lime. And also he prepared like a large water body for the for feeding the local inhabitants the pure water. So it is his humanitarian activities in that area. So from the lesson, the people actually they told us that actually the intangible things they are possessing more than the tangible things. That means they are actually inherited those lessons, like like the the intangible lessons that Khani Jahan teach them, and for that sake they took 5 times a prayer in the mosque, and clean the total area so that the mosque and the other parts of the structure is remaining clean, and every day they are taking care of those structure. So it's kind of sense of ownership they are building, and even the youngster they also taking this kind of like duties for the sake of the like climate change things for this structure. So if we talking about the locally led adaptation for culture heritage thing, I several times I advocated for like Bangladesh. There are a lot of like climate change guidelines, and a lot of like national adaptation plan, lot of things we already created, but the cultural heritage is not like incorporated in our climate change policy. So this is the most important crucial things what I understand. And through Andrew Potts endeavor or his efforts, these cultural heritage issues, it will focus in the culture like climate change arena. So I will congratulate and I will thank Andrew for taking this initiative. And the locally led adaptation, actually it is kind of like traditional knowledge with climate science and contemporary knowledge can guide us towards a good adaptation practice. So this is the deliverable from my side. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, and everyone. Preserving legacies.
Great. Thank you very, very much, Mahfouz. So in this session, we've tried to do two things. On the one hand, we tried to present the rich array of local work, of locally led adaptation at the intersection of culture and climate adaptation, also of research, of data collection. We tried to give you just a flavor of that with examples from around the world. That's on one side. At the same time, we also presented the new Global Goal on Adaptation, which is a new international policy that remarkably centers cultural heritage and climate adaptation. And that global goal on adaptation is now going to be elaborated upon, is going to be operationalized by the UN. And so what we at Preserving Legacies hope to do is connect these things. How do we make sure that the experiences of local leaders doing culture-based climate adaptation gets contributed, gets taken on board in the elaboration of the new global goal on adaptation, and at the same time that as the new policies are operationalized, that local communities are able to benefit from those policies in terms of having their work valorized as their culture-based adaptation work valorized and funded. And that is why Preserving Legacies is launching the new Heritage Adapts to Climate Alliance, HACA. The goal of HACA is to connect the experiences of local communities doing culture-based climate adaptation to the elaboration of the new global goal on adaptation. So I'm going to leave it at that and introduce our last participant, our colleague, Marlon Martin. Marlon is from the Ifugao community in the Philippines and is a leader there and globally on issues that we've been discussing, including through the organization. He helps lead SITMO, the Save the Ifugao Rice Terraces movement. But Marlon, I want to give you the last word, and drawing on your deep experience, ask you to simply share a thought on the challenge I raised. What is the importance of connecting the experience of local communities to the elaboration of the new international adaptation policy in your experience? Marlon, could you share a final thought on that topic?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Listening to all the presentations, I see parallels we just submitted our report to Victoria, and a lot of the presentations from Mahfouz, from Carlos, and from the other areas, we have like the keywords like, local values, indigenous knowledge, climate action being local, and the sense of having ownership of local climate action and sustainability. Climate science plus indigenous knowledge leads to climate solutions, climate action, mitigation, and adaptation. So I think it's so common in all localities that we need to integrate climate science and local knowledge and indigenous knowledge for us to address all these issues arising out of climate change. And for us here in what we've done after conducting the community assessments, our next steps would be towards integrating all these things into climate policies that, as per our experience, particularly in our community, which is it's an indigenous peoples area with several hundred years of history, where people have been trying to adapt. No one ever really masters their natural environment. So it's a process of adaptation. It's a very long process of adaptation, and we continue to adapt. And I think this body of knowledge that our communities have developed should be made part of, as an integral part of policies, of local policy. And in fact, as your earlier presentation, there's already a recognition of this by the international community, how climate science should be merged with indigenous knowledge, with local knowledge. And I think this is very important. Just 10 years ago, when we were advocating for the integration of indigenous knowledge in national policies, our government was not that accepting of such inclusion of other sources of knowledge. But recently, we've been seeing a lot of, like a surge of support for indigenous knowledge, for local knowledge, particularly on climate change. And this we have to and this has to be, these things would have to be integrated into local actions through policies. And I think I see this as a parallel in most of our areas. I saw this in Mafu's presentations, the importance of letting local people participate in decision making, in coming up with policies. I saw this with in the presentation of Carlos, how archaeology and the other sciences are also presented to local communities. The fusion of science and indigenous knowledge is more important. It's really very important. Yeah, so I think at least there's this, as I see it, there's this coming together now of local knowledge and indigenous knowledge plus climate science, which I think could be the solution to most of our problems on climate change. Andrew?
Yeah, thank you, Marlon. Well said. Coming together, which is exactly the aim of this new Heritage Adapts to Climate Alliance that the Climate Heritage Network and Preserving Legacies is launching, a platform to lift up the stories and experiences and wisdom and insights and data that you've heard about today, to make sure that's taken account of in the elaboration of the new global goal on adaptation, and in turn to make sure that local communities can benefit from having culture valued as climate action in their own local work, including through funding. So with that, we will bring to a conclusion today's session. Thank all of the speakers and thank the audience. And I think, Fatin, you wanted me to ask all of the speakers to turn on their cameras so that we could take a group photo of the session, of the speakers. So if you all wouldn't mind doing that. Fatin, you'll take it. There we go. All good. Okay, thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye, everyone.
Good to see you, Mahfouz. Good to see you,
Thank you.
Marlon.